last Friday afternoon in a lockdown where I've been told 8 people are being killed. I'm on my social media and the video popped up, so I watched it. Now, I didn't watch the whole thing because once I realised what I was watching, I didn't want to watch it anymore. But I can tell you now, there are some observations that I made about it is, this is horrible. It looked like one of those terrible video games, so I might be now a campaigner against them because it was just so awful. But the second thing is that I was now immediately informed that this was not 8 people dead, and that the numbers were going to be significant. It was a terrorist activity, and that the police's advice for us to stay put in our offices was 100% right.
Okay.
Because this was really, really, I mean, we had an idea of seriousness around 8, but it was just, when you got that visual picture, I now had a clear idea in my mind that what we were facing was terrible. And then I spent the next 2 hours crying. So I'm glad I've got that out and things like that. But people could have looked at it in a situation such as mine. I was talking to a young person at the weekend who was at the floral display, and they said they watched it by accident because it came up their feeds. And they sort of found themselves looking at it and then realised what they were looking and then shut it down themselves, but not before they had a good picture of it.
Okay. Catherine Dalzell, a Christchurch employment lawyer. Thanks for being with us, Catherine. Finally, and by the way, Fatamata, we've had quite a response about people talking about, someone here says, at last, someone tells it like it is in terms of the shoot-ups and violence on movies and film and online. So maybe we can return to that on the panel about that particular issue, because it hasn't been quite so much canvas, has it? But one of the questions that a lot of us are asking ourselves after the mosque killings is, who are we now as a nation? On the day this happened, Jacinda Ardern, what's become a catch cry, this is not who we are. What are your final thoughts on that, Fatimata?
Yeah, I mean, I think upon reflection, I think it's not who we want to be, but if we actually have a look at our history, it is who we were, and it is who we could be, but it is our chance and opportunity to decide as a nation who we will be and whether it is us or not. Peter, who are we now as a nation?
I think the date will go down in history. As one of the darkest days, but as the Prime Minister has rightly said, and others have rightly said, you can only bring the light into that darkness through love and aroha and faith in each other as fellow citizens and human beings. And I think what you're seeing around the country, I think we should focus on the response to the terrorist attack. And in due course, when that person has his time in the justice system, we should continue to focus on the individuals who were killed and also their families and the hope for our country. And isn't it great that we have a Prime Minister who can lead from the front on that score? I think it's fantastic, and it's a moment not only for our country but for her leadership as well. So it'll be a trying time, but we will recover.
You have both been absolutely wonderful, and a lot of feedback here, and I hope to get to some of that this week. But Fatimata Ba and Peter Fiu, thank you so much for joining us here on the panel. Checkpoint next. Thank you very much. Checkpoint next. See you tomorrow at 3:45.
This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Alex Perrottet. Tonight, the funeral processions have begun. Tributes flow as injured and grieving family members start to bury their dead. A Muslim surgeon fights back tears as he describes trying to save the life of a 4-year-old gunshot victim. The Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, returns to Christchurch and announces there'll be 2-minute silence in memory of the victims of the mosque massacre this Friday. We pay a visit to an Auckland mosque ahead of a remembrance event on Friday where people of all faiths are invited to the call to prayer. And we interview the lawyer who represented Norway's worst terrorist. He tells us, perhaps controversially, it should be an open trial. More coming up after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The Prime Minister has announced there will be a 2-minute silence this Friday, a week after the terrorist attacks. At a news conference in Christchurch this afternoon, Jacinda Ardern gave details of how the country can mark the tragedy. She says planning is underway for a memorial service in Christchurch. Meanwhile, she says Muslims in New Zealand don't support a call by the jihadist movement Islamic State for retaliation over the mosque massacre. The group says the killings should wake up those who were fooled and incite the supporters of the caliphate to avenge their religion. But Jacinda Ardern says that's not the response that she's received from the local Muslim community.
What they seek, of course, is justice for family members, and that will happen through our New Zealand system. But overwhelmingly, they keep reflecting back to me that sense of support they have felt from the New Zealand community, compassion, empathy. I have not heard that language from the Muslim community in New Zealand. I have heard the complete opposite.
In the last 10 years, there has been no specific mention of the threat posed by white supremacists or right-wing nationalism in the public documents of New Zealand's intelligence agencies. The government will hold a high-level inquiry into the actions of 5 agencies in the wake of the Christchurch attack. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
In a decade of annual reports and ministerial briefings, violent extremism is referred to often, but in the context of the group Islamic State and conflict in the Middle East, the threat of right-wing nationalists is not specifically mentioned. The SIS Director-General Rebecca Kitteridge did raise it briefly at Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee last month. The Minister responsible for the SIS and GCSB, Andrew Little, says the agency started work on that particular threat 9 months ago, prompted by information from overseas partners and events in other countries. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
A man who runs a Christchurch insulation firm with Nazi-themed imagery has been charged with reposting the live stream of the mosque killings. Police searched a property in Avonside on Tuesday morning and took Philip Arps, who is 44, into custody. He appeared in the District Court today on charges of distributing objectionable material and will reappear next month. His company uses a black sun image on their work vans, which is linked to neo-Nazi groups. The Turkish ambassador to New Zealand has been called in to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to explain inflammatory comments made by Turkey's president in the wake of the attacks. At an election rally, Recep Tayyip Erdogan criticised the Anzacs for their role in Gallipoli and threatened to send New Zealanders and Australians who came to his country with anti-Islam sentiment back in a casket. The Australian government has demanded the comments be withdrawn or further diplomatic action will be taken. It is also reviewing its travel advisory to Turkey just weeks from Gallipoli commemorations. New Zealand's Foreign Minister Winston Peters said yesterday he plans to put the record straight with regard to New Zealand. He's now on his way to Turkey after a stop in Indonesia. The first 2 burials of victims of Friday's mosque shootings have been held in Christchurch, and more are being held shortly. Mourners gathered at the Memorial Park Cemetery in Linwood this afternoon to farewell father and son, Khalid and Hamza Mustafa. Our reporter Andrew McRae was there.
44-year-old Khalid Mustafa and 15-year-old Hamza were wrapped in cloth, as in the Islamic tradition. They were carried high in the air by mourners, firstly to a marquee where prayers were said, before being taken to the gravesite nearby. The 2 were buried in separate graves. The majority of mourners stood back while family prayed at the graves, but later came forward and sprinkled dirt into each plot. The bodies of 13 of the mosque shooting victims have now been approved for release to their families. The Prime Minister says authorities are united in their determination to reunite family with loved ones as quickly as possible. More burials are taking place shortly. In Christchurch, Ko Andrew McRae tēnei.
A senior nurse at Christchurch Hospital says it was fortunate its emergency department was not already busy on Friday before the mosque shootings. Tracy Williams was the emergency department's nursing controller on Friday. She says it was shift crossover when the shooting victims started arriving, so many morning and afternoon staff were able to respond.
Luckily, the emergency department wasn't overly busy on that day and we were able to transfer many patients out to the hospital. We had 48 presentations in under an hour.
Tracy Williams says nurses working on the day have had formal debriefing sessions. 29 of the people injured in the mosque shootings are still in hospital, with 8 in critical condition. It's 5:05. The Blues coaches have thrown their support behind All Black Sonny Bill Williams' trip to Christchurch to support those affected by last week's terror attacks. It means Williams, a Muslim, will miss the Blues game against the Highlanders in Auckland on Friday. Assistant coach Tom Coventry says the coaches thought it would be a good idea, even before Williams made the request.
We were going to ask Sonny if he'd like to make the decision to go, and so we were all in agreement. So it was a pretty short conversation. We all knew how hard he took it, so it was a pretty simple decision to make.
Meanwhile, Australian media are reporting Williams is having informal talks to return to the Bulldogs and the National Rugby League. Williams ends his contract with New Zealand Rugby after this year's World Cup in Japan. The Silver Ferns great Irene van Dijk warns underestimating the New Zealand men's netball intelligence is a mistake. The Silver Ferns will play New Zealand men's invitational side in June, but it's prompted criticism in terms of safety for the Ferns. Van Dijk says the men's physicality is the last thing anyone should be worried about, and their netball knowledge is being seriously underestimated.
The public have no idea how incredibly skillful these male netballers are. They haven't seen them, and I think with it being televised, it's going to be an epic battle.
Irene van Dijk. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, good nutrition as an antidote to stress. We are not talking about comfort eating. And a window on the world of what Canadians are making of Britain in the run-up to Brexit.
They went to France, they went to Italy, they went to Switzerland, and I questioned him at some point saying, why didn't you go to England? And he said, oh, no, you work with these people, but you don't go and visit.
Stiff upper lip with me, Brian Crump, after the news at 7 on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, mainly fine today with a few showers tomorrow. Auckland through to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and the Central High Country. Fine, apart from areas of cloud with isolated showers in the afternoons and evenings. Gisborne through to Wairarapa, cloudy periods and the odd shower. Whanganui to Wellington, fine weather. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and the Canterbury High Country. Areas of morning and evening cloud, otherwise fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. For the Canterbury Plains, Otago, Southland and Fiordland, areas of low cloud or fog morning and evening, otherwise mainly fine. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods and the odd light shower. It's 5:07. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Kia ora, good evening and welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Alex Perrottet. In the Auckland studio, we'll cross soon to Lisa Owen in Christchurch. Coming up on the program, father and son victims of the Christchurch mosque massacre are the first to be buried today. A surgeon chokes back tears as he describes operating on a 4-year-old victim who suffered gunshot wounds to her pelvis. The Prime Minister arrives back in Christchurch, where she declares there will be 2-minute silence on Friday in memory of the 50 lives lost. We speak to a survivor of the attack who vows never to pray in a mosque again. And we pay a visit in Auckland to a mosque ahead of a remembrance event this coming Friday. Victim Support starts making payments to victims from the $7 million donated so far to the Give a Little Fund. But first, Lisa Owen is standing by in Christchurch. Lisa.
I should be lying beside you. That is the heartbreaking tribute from a son who survived the Christchurch mosque shootings as he buried his father and brother today. Kia ora, good evening. I'm Lisa Owen.
And I'm Logan Church, and tonight we're broadcasting live from the front of the Botanic Gardens in Christchurch.
And today, hundreds of people gathered at the Memorial Park Cemetery for the first burial of the 50 victims of Friday's terrorist attacks. As we go to air tonight, another burial is underway at that same cemetery and more are expected to follow this evening. Logan, you were there this morning for the first burial. Tell us a little bit about it.
So hundreds of devout Muslims gathered a couple of hours ago to bury Khalid Mustafa and his son Hamza Mustafa. Khalid was 44, Hamza only 16. We've spoken on Checkpoint before about Hamza in particular, who was a student at Kashmir High School and a much valued member of their school community. So there was certainly a lot of grief at the Memorial Park Cemetery this afternoon. The weather was sunny today, but the mood was certainly not. This is what happened. Just after midday, the funeral procession made its way across town to the Memorial Park Cemetery. Escorted by a police car, lights flashing, A van carrying father and son was followed by about a dozen cars, full of Khalid and Hamza's closest family. Hundreds of Muslims from all over the world gathered at the cemetery for the service for the Syrians who came to New Zealand just last year, a place they thought was their safe haven. This section of the cemetery was surrounded by a tall fence, a large marquee in the middle. Armed police were along every fence line and on every entrance. No one was taking any chances today. Out of that van, 2 open casket-like boxes, containing Khalid and Hamza's bodies, wrapped in cloth. They were taken inside the marquee before prayers, called Salat al-Janaza, were said.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Media were allowed to film the funeral from a grass bank. Dozens of journalists from all over the world watched on. But perhaps most striking were the mounds of dirt the council had dug up, marked by orange road cones. After the bodies were carried to those graves, they were lowered in. Then the family, followed by friends and onlookers in the crowds, some visibly injured, walked past in a line, dropping handfuls of dirt into the graves. And at the end of the formalities, funeral goers emerged absolutely devastated. Among them were Gulshad and Nasreen from Auckland.
We wanted to be here to support the people who has been victimized and who has been killed, and that's why we came on the first flight. We were crying when we heard the news, and I said to my brother-in-law that if it is possible we can go, and then we arranged quickly for first my sister Nasreen and me and Sheikh and Zainal. We all came together just to come here to support the whole group, our community as well.
The pair spoke about what they believe the local Muslim community needs right now.
Just the presence of people around, I think brings a lot of relief. They're there with us.
As far as people are there comforting them, I think they will be all right. But it's not like it will go away that quickly. It will be. It will take a long time for them to get out of it. And it is not like only one person. They are grieving for everybody. And we are doing the same. And it's not easy for us. We didn't lose them. The people who lost them, they must be very heartbroken. We are.
Jamil El-Biza from Australia witnessed some truly remarkable words from Zahid Mustafa, Khalid's surviving son. Zahid was at the cemetery in a wheelchair, recovering from his own wounds.
We gave room, and he did say to his father, I shouldn't be standing in front of you, I should be standing beside you, I should be lying beside you. I don't want to be here. And like I said before, that's very hard for him to say, especially in the presence of his mother. You can only imagine what the family's going through, and they're a very, very small family here. But their wider family showed their support, and we really, really appreciate that.
I should be lying beside you. Heartbreaking words to hear from someone whose family has just been ripped apart. But as the afternoon wore on and the cemetery emptied, thoughts went to the coming days. These were just 2 of the 50 people who lost their lives last Friday. Many families are still waiting for bodies to be returned. In Islamic tradition, dead bodies need to be buried as soon as possible. In Christchurch for Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Tonight we're coming to you from the other side of the park. So Deans Avenue Mosque is on the far side of the park, and this outside the Botanic Gardens, as you can see behind me, the flowers just spread and spread and spread, and every evening more people come. They lay flowers, tributes, cards, they just keep coming. Now, it's been revealed that 2 survivors of the Christchurch mosque terror attacks, they broke through a glass window and they ran wounded to the hospital to raise the first alarm. The hospital is about 100 metres from where we are standing, but it is, well, just under a K, about 700 metres that they would have had to have run through the park from the Deans Avenue Mosque to raise that first alarm. Now, at a press conference at the hospital this afternoon, staff say the 2 men who had wounds after being cut ran through the front door of the emergency department to tell staff that there had been a shooting and to warn them to expect more patients. Now, hospital staff went on to receive 48 patients in less than an hour, with one surgeon breaking down today as he described treating a 4-year-old girl who had been shot in the pelvis. Here's Bridget Burke.
Very sad to see a young girl on a table with vascular injury, with 3 of my pediatric consultants on her. Excuse me.
An emotional vascular surgeon, Adib Kanafa, talking about the 4-year-old girl with gunshot wounds to her pelvis in Theatre 6 at Christchurch Hospital on Friday afternoon.
I have 4 kids, and the youngest is 7, the oldest is 14, and I've just imagined that this is one of my kids. I coped, I was able to perform my job, and I left my emotion after. After I prepared her, my colleagues were around me as well.
Choking back tears and comforted by his colleagues, Mr Kanafa said the little girl was transferred to Starship Hospital, and while she remains in a critical condition, he is optimistic she will survive. A Muslim who trained at Birmingham Hospital in England, Mr Kanafa said he'd also lost personal friends in the attack.
One of my own patients, vascular department, he passed away. And the other doctor, Amjad, also I knew, he passed away. Of course, Salma, my wife, knows, as a woman in circles, she knows most of the wives have lost their husbands. So we knew some of them, we visited some of them. As a doctor, usually you tend to perform well because we perform under stress, so we're pretty good. Emotionally, you live that when you really go home and you comfort yourself.
Emergency medicine specialist Dr Dominic Fleischer, who worked through the Christchurch quake, said whilst gunshot injuries were not unusual at his trauma centre, there were usually 1 to 2 a month, not 48 patients in less than an hour.
The first inkling we had is when 2 patients came through with glass injuries who'd broken through a window, and they ran to us and told us we'd expect many more in the next few minutes, and they were right. So we activated the mass casualty incident, which was the earthquake, was the last time we did that. And then the next 2 hours was really a blur.
Dr Fleischer said hospital staff managed to save everyone except 1 victim who died on arrival. Meanwhile, Police Commissioner Mike Bush today commended police for the time they took responding to Friday's massacre, saying their swift response prevented a 3rd terror attack. He said police were on the scene of the Deans Ave shooting within 6 minutes, the armed offenders squad within 10 minutes, and the alleged gunman was in custody in 21 minutes. He said he had no doubt the offender was on his way to another attack when he was arrested by 2 officers on Brougham Street. But while the police response on the day was swift, there has been some criticism and frustration about the time taken to release the bodies of the 50 murder victims.
As of last night, at 11:30 p.m, 21 of those victims had been formally identified. By the end of Wednesday, we should have completed the majority of those identifications. But I have to say that some of those victims will take a little longer.
Over 100 people are involved in the process, from the mortuary to victim identification teams and pathologists and coroners.
We have a large police team. We have a large number of forensic experts. We have international experts as part of that 120 strong team whose absolute focus is reuniting these victims with their loved ones.
Mr Bush said whilst his number 1 priority was looking after bereaved families, the police also had other obligations.
And the first one, on behalf of the Chief Coroner and all of the coroners, is to ensure absolute accuracy in that identification process. It must be to the standard required for a coroner, part of our process, and we have 6 coroners, including the Chief Coroner, on site right here to enable that to occur, working with our reconciliation team. That standard of identification must be to evidential standards, and that occurs here. So there is a hearing for every one of those victims taking place very close to where you are now. And of course, if we get that wrong, that is unforgivable.
The identification process itself began inside the 2 mosques, with family members identifying their loved ones later.
The primary evidence we need for identifications is around fingerprints, DNA and odontology. That's the top bar, but we use circumstantial and visual as part of that process.
Mr Bush said the police also had comprehensive legal responsibilities and was working as quickly as possible.
We must prove for prosecution the cause of death to the satisfaction of the coroner, to the judge. You cannot convict for murder without that cause of death.
As we go to air, police say 30 victims have now been formally identified. For Checkpoint, Bridget Burke.
And you may remember a few days ago we brought you an interview with Tariq Chinafa. Now he is one of those men that was mentioned in that piece. He ran across the park to raise the alarm to get to the hospital. He was barefoot, he'd removed his shoes to pray in the Deans Avenue Mosque. He had nothing with him. They had to abandon everything, no ID, no phone, no nothing, just looking for help. And he said it was a nurse who helped him phone his wife and let her know that he had survived the shooting. It is the Prime Minister's second trip to Christchurch today since the terror attacks, and during that visit she's been grappling to keep the focus on New Zealand. International flare-ups relating to Turkey and Islamic State have proved a distraction for the Prime Minister, who met with students, paramedics and the Muslim community. Now here's our political reporter Craig McCulloch.
The Prime Minister back in an aching Christchurch, her second visit since the massacre, but her focus being pulled abroad. Islamic State jihadists have threatened retaliation after Friday's attack. Jacinda Ardern seeking to bring calm.
I have not heard that language from the Muslim community in New Zealand. I have heard the complete opposite.
Turkey too is causing a diplomatic headache. Its President Tayyip Erdogan has hit out, calling the shootings part of a wider attack on his country.
Hundreds and thousands of New Zealanders have made pilgrimages to that place as an acknowledgement of what ties and binds our countries. And so I reject the idea that we are losing that relationship or will lose that relationship. But for now, you'll appreciate that given that my Deputy Prime Minister is travelling there, that actually where this conversation will happen will be face to face.
The international disputes are proving an unwelcome distraction for Jacinda Ardern, who met with emergency workers and the Muslim community on the ground. She announced 2 minutes silence to take place on Friday, small solace for those families frustrated still not to have their loved ones' bodies. So far, just 30 of the 50 victims have been approved for release.
I know the process has been incredibly difficult and frustratingly slow from the perspective of family members, but on the side I've seen those who are working on this process as well, and I can also acknowledge that they are working incredibly hard too.
The Prime Minister sought to offer comfort to students earlier in the day, visiting a school hard hit by the shootings. Kashmir High pupils welcoming Ms Ardern with a rousing haka. They lost 2 of their own and a former student in Friday's attack. Ms Ardern urging them to remember their friends and not the accused killer.
It's their names and their stories that we need to keep telling, and it's them that we need to honour. Yes, there will be interest in the terrorist who did this, but if I could request one thing, don't say his name. Don't dwell on who he is. Dwell on your students and your friends, because they're the most important people that we need to remember right now.
And then she turned the questions over to the audience, letting the students ask whatever they wanted. One question clearly hitting home.
How am I? Thank you for asking. I'm very sad.
A sentiment the whole of New Zealand can relate to. From Christchurch for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
Now, while the police are working very hard to reopen the Linwood Mosque, at least one worshipper there says that he will never be able to go back and pray at that mosque. And he says he doesn't think he can go to any mosque and pray now. He is too scared after those shootings. Tawfasa Alam went to the Linwood Avenue Mosque every week for Friday prayers. He said he tried never to miss a day. But he says everything has changed for him now, and he is afraid and wary of strangers. Mr. Alam said on the day of the shootings, the mosque car park was very full. All the cars lined the driveway, and when he first heard the noises, he thought someone had crashed into the last car in that line of vehicles. And it was only a few moments later that he realised that someone was attacking them.
Beside me, there is another young boy. He was around 11, 12 years old. He was crying and saying to me, "My father is dying. my father is dying. Then what I did, I hold him very strong, and I took him in the ground the same way I was laying on the floor.
So you covered him to protect him?
I didn't cover him. I hold him very strong on the ground to make sure that he is not standing, because I saw people, whoever tried to stand, they got hurt or they got bullet,
They got shot if they stood up?
Yes.
Was there panic around you?
Yeah, they were screaming, they are crying, and blood was everywhere. So, you know the situation. And I didn't try to go out because I was not sure how many of them were there. So I didn't try to go out at all.
You thought maybe there was more than one person and you didn't want to run into them on the way out?
No, I didn't try at all.
Yeah.
Rather, I was on the ground. I called to police. I called to my wife and my relatives so that they can help us by sending police. Because when I was calling to police, I couldn't give them the right address, and I don't know who took the phone, because I just after 111, I just pressed the random number, so I had no idea whoever picked up the call. So that's why I called to my wife and my relatives to make sure that.
Sorry to interrupt. Did you call your wife while the shooting was happening to try and speak to her, to try and get help?
Yes. I was telling to her that, can you please call to police and send police here? Someone is killing us in the mosque.
Could she understand what was happening? Did she realize?
She realized that when I was crying, because I was crying, I was not stable. So she was understanding, but she was very, she can't think what to do. Then she called to my friend, and my friend said it also happened in the mosque, the other mosque, because my friend went to the other mosque.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Dean's Avenue.
How are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, for a few days I couldn't sleep at all. I was dreaming the faces I used to see in the mosque, because all the people were in the mosque. They are very close to me. I used to see them every Friday. I used to talk with them. They were really, really good people. They are innocent. And the killer didn't give him any chance at all. We had no idea. And when the shooting was going on, from the women's room, women were screaming and they were shouting, "Please don't kill us." But still, the killer shot them very closely. And it was horrible.
Do you think you will be able to go back to that mosque to pray?
No, I can't go there anymore. I can't go any mosque at all. Doesn't matter, it's in Christchurch or Auckland. I feel really afraid.
What does that mean for you, that you can't go to a mosque to say your prayers with your brothers and sisters?
No, I feel afraid.
So what will you do?
I'll pray at home.
And what does that mean for you to not be able to go to a mosque? How important is it for you to go to a mosque?
It's very important. It is very important to go to a mosque. But honestly, I feel really unsafe. And I'm very afraid and frustrated. So that's why if I go in the mosque, maybe I'm not able to concentrate to my prayer. And, I'll be remembering all the incident happened around me in that day.
And that is Faisal Alam there speaking to me this afternoon. He's so incredibly sad that he wants to honour his religion and his faith, but now feels so afraid to return to the mosque that he loved to go to every Friday, and he won't be praying there anymore, as he says. It's unimaginable to think of him lying on the floor of that mosque trying to call his wife, thinking that it was perhaps the last conversation he was going to have with her. This Friday, 1 week from the Christchurch attack and on the Muslim holy day, mosques in 4 corners of Auckland will open their doors to people of all faiths who want to remember the lives that have been lost. The mosques in Ponsonby, Ranui, North Shore and Pakuranga will open from 5 until 8 p.m. for any members of the public who want to come and pay their respects. Now, Alex, you went to one of those mosques today to see how they're preparing.
Yes, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, we know churches and mosques around the country have already hosted prayer sessions. There's been some very moving outpourings. So I took our cameraman Nick Monroe to the Al-Masjid Al-Jami in Ponsonby, where people are still leaving flowers, flags and cards at the front gate. Along a silent back street of Ponsonby, the fresh scent of flowers and words written on coloured card express profound sorrow, solidarity, encouragement. So many of the sentiments expressed here are assurances that Muslim people in this country are safe. Al-Masjid Al-Jami is the country's oldest mosque, and people are still coming by, some still in shock and tears over Friday's tragic attack. Vicky brought flowers from Devonport and wanted to come to pray.
It's just ghastly. You know, I lived in London, I lived in Paris, in England, I lived in France, I lived in Australia. You know, you can't get away from it. It just seems to be this hate. Sometimes it takes something awful to bring about something beautiful, and you can see how much New Zealand loves it, you know, loves everyone.
Heidi has driven down today from Gulf Harbour in Whangaparoa, about 40 minutes away, and has bought a peace lily. She wanted to bring something that is living. She says she's reaching out to people around her who are Muslim, such as her son's after-school carer.
My little boy goes to after-school care with a really lovely Muslim lady that she just shows so much love and care for him, so just wanted her to know how much she is appreciated and loved in our community.
Marcelo is from Chile and brought flowers and a Chilean flag to hang on the fence to represent the sorrow that his family and his people feel.
I'm not Muslim, but like I say, I'm a Catholic, but I feel like the pain of the Muslim people, you know, so like, yeah, I'm doing my praise for them.
Bilal Sleimankhel is originally from Afghanistan but has lived in Epsom for the best part of a decade. He's a regular at the mosque and is acting as a guide, meeting and welcoming those who drop by.
For seeing all of this, it's touching our hearts, and it's, you know, showing all this respect. It's beautiful, like some of these words, you know, the words can mean so much.
Regular visitors of this mosque are still coming and going to pray, being let in and out by the heavily armed police at the gates. Bilal was told that they could be here for weeks. There's no cars allowed inside the gates, so the Catholic parish of the Sacred Heart, just across the road, is providing parking and other support.
We've got to take our shoes off. Thank you for that. We've got a very good relationship with the church across the road, and Kathy and Father Rory, they've been amazing, and even before Friday we've always had a good relationship.
And out the back in the far room of the mosque there are tables covered in hundreds of cards that have been brought in out of the rain over the last few days.
Our deepest sympathy to all those who follow Islam. Whether you are a New Zealand born or we have welcomed you from another country, you are us and we are so sorry for your loss.
Bilal says he's been moved by the outpouring of grief and hopes that somehow good will come of what has happened. And he hopes that the diverse people in this area will be drawn even closer.
And people stopping by and talking to each other, that's what I reckon, you know, that's what's making us stronger and should make us more closer.
Bilal Sleimankhel there at Al-Masjid Al-Jami in Ponsonby. It will be open to the public along with the mosques in Ranui, North Shore and Pakuranga from 5 to 8 p.m. this Friday. Gone 26 minutes to 6. Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Turkey's ambassador to New Zealand is summoned for a please explain after his president's inflammatory comments in the wake of the Christchurch attacks. And the lawyer for Norwegian mass killer Anders Breivik explains why it was important to have his trial in an open court. We'd love your feedback, of course. You can text us on 2101, tweet us at CheckpointRNZ. We're on Facebook as well, and our email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. But first, here's Susana Leatawa with the headlines.
There will be a 2-minute silence on Friday, a week after the terrorist attacks on Christchurch mosques. The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern also told reporters in Christchurch this afternoon preparations are well underway for a memorial service. And she says Muslims are rejecting Islamic State's call for retaliation over the mosque massacre. The government's to hold an inquiry into the omission of the threat posed by white supremacists or right-wing nationalism from statements of New Zealand's intelligence agencies. Annual reports in the past decade refer to violent extremism, but only in the context of Islamic State or the Middle East conflict. The threat of right nationalists is not mentioned through the SIS head, although the SIS head did raise it briefly at a select committee meeting last month. SIS and GCSB Minister Andrew Little says the agencies started work on the threat from right nationalists 9 months ago. A man who runs a Christchurch insulation firm with Nazi-themed imagery has been charged with reposting the live stream of the mosque killings. Philip Arps, who is 44, was taken into custody yesterday. He appeared in the district court today on charges of distributing objectionable material and will reappear next month. Mourners gathered at the Memorial Park Cemetery in Linwood this afternoon to farewell father and son, Khalid and Hamza Mustafa, the first 2 victims to be buried. 44-year-old Khalid and 15-year-old Hamza Mustafa were wrapped in cloth, as in the Islamic tradition. They were carried high in the air by mourners, firstly to a marquee, where prayers were said before being taken to the gravesite nearby. The Prime Minister has acknowledged Australia's connection to last week's tragedy, but says it doesn't reflect the Trans-Tasman relationship. The gunman who shot and killed 50 people was Australian, but had lived in New Zealand sporadically. Jacinda Ardern says she's aware Australians will be feeling the tragedy. Those are the headlines. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks very much, Susanna. See you at 6 o'clock. Nona Peltier is here with the business news. You were a bit excited yesterday about these dairy figures coming out today.
Yes.
But we're a bit disappointed, are we?
Well, it's not so much I'm disappointed or you're disappointed, but some people will probably be disappointed, yes, because while there was profitable results on both from Synlait and from Fonterra, the underlying financial position was a bit more concerning. So Fonterra had turned from a loss to a gain. They made a profit of $80 million. That's a net profit, which is pretty good because they had made a substantial loss the year before of $348 million. However, their underlying profit, which is the pit that before you pay your tax and all of that, was down like 29%.
Right.
So that's not a great result. And that's partly because the cooperative has been struggling in Australia, where there's been a drought, which means that their facilities there are being underused. That squeezed their margins as a result, their volumes and so on. And so, yeah, that's what the underlying picture is. At the same time, the market was a bit disappointed because they expected to get a bit more information about what the cooperative's doing in terms of what it's planning to sell, what progress it's made, and there was really none of that forthcoming. There was also a big question mark over the dividend. Well, they still haven't decided whether they're going to pay one in the full year, so that's a little upsetting. Overall, though, I guess the market reacted not too badly. It was down 2.5%, 11 cent down to $4.27. Now, in the case of Synlait, which also reported its first half today, that reaction was a lot more disappointing because that company failed to deliver on expectations big time. And that share price was dragged down 14%. That's $1.54 down, $9.75 was the closing price. Now, that actually dragged our market down overall, too. We went down 0.2%, 62 points down to 9,436. And that's on a day when really the share prices in Asia have been pretty steady. Right. We're looking at the U.S. Federal Reserve potentially overnight, maybe suggesting that interest rates won't be hiked there. So against that backdrop, you can see that this has definitely had an impact on our market today. Yeah.
Other market numbers?
Other market numbers, I guess you want the dollar, right?
Yeah,
let's see, 68.4 US cents, 96.6 Australian, and 51.6 pence. It almost seems like it's stuck on those numbers. It's been the same really for days.
Stability is a good thing.
Yes, it is.
Thank you very much. Nona Peltier there with the very latest in the business world. Just coming up to 20 minutes to 6. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade has summoned the Turkish ambassador to New Zealand for a please explain. This is after inflammatory comments were made by the Turkish president following the mosque attacks. The comments have sparked a diplomatic row down under. Australia is reviewing its travel advice for Turkey. This is just a month out from the Gallipoli commemorations. And the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison described the comments as reckless and deeply offensive. And today he also summoned the Turkish ambassador to his office. Elizabeth Brown has this report.
Your grandparents came here and they returned in caskets. Have no doubt we will send you back like your grandfathers. That was a threat uttered by Turkey's President Erdogan to any New Zealander or Australian who goes to Turkey with anti-Muslim sentiment. It was made at a campaign rally in northern Turkey, not far from Gallipoli. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison said Mr Erdogan is out of line.
I don't find these comments very helpful. I don't find them very accurate or truthful as well, because the actions of the Australian and New Zealand government has been consistent with our values of welcoming and supporting people from all around the world.
Mr Morrison turned his words into action and called the Turkish ambassador into his office to demand the comments be withdrawn.
I am expecting, and I have asked for these comments to be clarified, to be withdrawn. I've asked for these comments, particularly their reporting of the misrepresented position of Australia on Turkish television, the state-sponsored broadcaster, to be taken down.
The ambassador reportedly suggested that Mr Erdogan, who's in the midst of local election campaigning, made the comments in the heat of the moment. Mr Morrison says that's not good enough and more diplomatic action could follow if Turkey doesn't respond appropriately.
The excuses I don't accept that the things are said in the heat of the moment. The excuses that I don't accept are the things are said in an electoral context. I expect in our relationships with our friends that we always act in the good faith of that relationship. There is an opportunity, I think, for that to now take place. I will extend the time to do that.
New Zealand's Foreign Minister Winston Peters has left the country. He's headed for Turkey after a stop in Indonesia to express his condolences for the Indonesians killed in the Christchurch attacks. He says he'll address Mr Erdogan's comments when he gets to Istanbul.
The misinformation that's been spread around the world has to be cleared up. We make it very clear. This is not an act of a New Zealander. It's a foreigner on our shores that perpetrated this absolute terrorist atrocity. And we've got to get that clear. Then things will be sorted out.
Mr Erdogan also used a political rally to play parts of a video live streamed by the Christchurch gunmen, despite New Zealand's request for the distressing and violent footage not to be distributed as a tool to stoke nationalist and religious sentiment. The ACT leader, David Seymour, says he hopes Mr Peters will protest in the strongest possible terms.
Somebody who politically campaigns off the back of this tragedy in any country is morally deplorable, and we should be taking the strongest possible stance to stand up for that principle and show those values.
The Justice Minister, Andrew Little, says any security fears around the Gallipoli commemorations in Turkey will continue to be monitored.
The Ministry of Foreign Affairs and others, on the basis of advice from around the world, are always assessing the security interests of New Zealanders wherever they are.
New Zealand officials say the travel advice for Turkey still stands. Information about the Christchurch mosque shootings has been added and says international reactions are difficult to predict and may change at short notice. For Checkpoint, call Elizabeth Brown, aho.
17 minutes to 6. Victim support has begun making payments to people affected by the Christchurch mosque attacks after receiving $7 million in donations. More than 83,000 people have donated money, with a separate Islamic crowdfunding site pulling in $2.3 million. So, where is the money going and how quickly are people getting it? Our reporter Nita Blake-Person has the detail.
Victim Support says so far $186,000 has been paid out of the fund. Families of those killed in the attack are eligible to receive an initial payment of $15,000. $10,000 of that comes from the fundraising and $5,000 comes from the Ministry of Justice's Victim Assistance Scheme. Each person admitted to hospital as a result of the attack is entitled to $5,000, but more money is available to meet related expenses, including family travel. Victim Support's Chief Executive Kevin So says that money is being made available very quickly when it's requested.
Pretty much immediately. The important thing is that we identify need and we can actually pay out based on need to ensure that the additional funding over and above the lump sums has been used to meet immediate needs and emergency payments for things like family travel and food and other urgent costs that they have in their lives.
Kevin So says Victim Support is being proactive in contacting those who may be eligible, but it's vital for people to get in touch if they need the money.
We've basically said we already want to touch base with those families of the deceased, people admitted to hospital and witnesses. It's crucial that those people contact us, so therefore they can access the funding.
Mr So says it's too early to say how much of the money will be used in the long term, but he's promising it will go to those affected by the mosque attacks.
Absolutely confirm that the money will be going to the families of the of people affected by this tragedy, and that it will be in no way going to the operating costs of Victim Support.
There are now more than 50 different Give a Little pages available for people to make donations to those affected by the Christchurch shootings. A Give a Little spokeswoman, Robin Lentel, says they have all been verified by their staff, and 42 of those pages are sending the money they raised to Victim Support anyway.
You know, there's a young boy on there who's made cookies in kind of a bake sale, so his community are rallying around him to donate, and then all of that money goes to the Victim Support page as well.
The Spark Foundation, which runs Give a Little, has waived its usual 5% fee for running the page. Separate Give a Little pages have also been set up to help individual victims and families. One of those has been set up by Melanie Coker, whose employee Abdullah Naeem lost family in the shooting at the Deans Ave Mosque. Ms Coker runs a tutoring business, and she says many of Abdullah's students and colleagues wanted to help.
We just wanted to do something specific for him and for his family. I haven't met his mother. So in some ways I feel, you know, maybe we should have directed something maybe towards his mother or something like that. But because we know Abdullah and the parents know Abdullah, and we wanted to support him specifically because he's lost both a brother and a father. So sort of seemed appropriate that we do something that's just for him and for his family.
She says several people have made donations of $1,000 to the page, money she hopes to make available to Abdullah Naeem and his family as soon as possible. For Checkpoint, Nita Blakeperson.
It's just on 13 minutes to 6. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex signed a condolence book at New Zealand House in London overnight. Prince Harry and his wife Meghan, who's expecting their first child, visited the High Commission and each laid a small bouquet of flowers outside the building. They spoke with High Commissioner Sir Jerry Mataparai inside and signed a book of condolence on behalf of the British royal family. Prince Harry wrote Aroha Nui on the page under their signatures. Harry and Meghan, who are expecting the first child in the northern spring, visited New Zealand, of course, last October as part of their Pacific tour. And it's just coming up to 12 minutes to 6. I'm Alex Perrottet. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. We're keen for your feedback, of course. Text us on 2101. Tweet us at CheckpointRNZ. You can also get in touch on the email. The address is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The lawyer who represented the man responsible for Norway's worst terror attack says it's important that the gunman behind the Christchurch massacre is tried in open court. A 28-year-old Australian man has been charged with murder over Friday's mosque killings, but police say he will face more charges when he reappears before the courts next month. Now, he's indicated he would like to represent himself at trial. Now, discussions are underway among New Zealand media about how that would be covered. The white supremacist Anders Breivik massacred 77 people in Norway in 2011 and was represented by Gia Lipstad. Mr Lipstad spoke to our reporter Bridget Burke and told her having his trial in an open court was vital in proving how incredibly flawed Breivik's ideologies had been.
Breivik's court was open, and the news and the television
was following it, not directly. When he was given his statement, there was a delay in the television. So if he said something extremely hurting, it could be stopped. But the court was open, and I think that it's important that we have an open court, because when you have a right-wing extremist that believe that there's a war going on, that he believes that Muslim is the reason for that the world is on fire, it's important to meet that argument with knowledge, to argue against it, and that people can listen to the arguments, because there are, of course, no truth in what these right-wing extremists believe. And in a court case, when you have witnesses with lots of knowledge, when you have a judge with lots of knowledge, when you have the police with lots of knowledge, and you have expert witness with lots of knowledge, they're so easy for everyone to see that the beliefs that a right-wing extremist terrorists have is just fantasy. And I think it's better to show that it's fantasy than hide it.
I understand that the gunman here in Christchurch referred to Mr. Breivik, your client, as true inspiration. Do you believe both these men are of the same understanding and belief?
Well, the most obvious similarity is that they are both right-wing extremists, and they believe that there is some kind of war going on, and they have their hate and their action is against Muslim. Breivik believes that there are lots of different cells all over Europe and the world. And of course, what I read in the papers that the gunman in New Zealand also has been reading the manifesto from Mr. Breivik. I know that the manifesto is out there, and I also know that in the East Europe, for instance, in Russia or in the East Europe, there are people that look upon Breivik as some kind of hero. Not many, but some. In the right-wing extremists, among the right-wing extremists, he's in some part of Europe looked upon as a hero.
Do you think it's evil to have the extreme view, or it's evil to execute the actions?
Oh, that's difficult questions. I will say it's not evil to have this kind of views. It's stupid, but not evil. But of course, it's evil to act on them. And I think that the most important thing is to discuss why people have these right-wing extremist thoughts, and to use experts in newspapers, in the television, in documentary, in debates, telling what's the truth and what's not the truth. Because, I mean, fake news and alternative news is something that young people have to deal with every day. And these right-wing extremists, they are also looking for the truth, but they are not listening to it because they are not reading the newspapers. But a case like this can also open their minds that maybe we have understand this the wrong way, because there are so many people with a lot of knowledge telling that we have wrong ideas, and I think that's important.
You said before the trial that you feel like you've lost your soul in this case, and that you hope you get it back when it's over, and that it will be in the same condition it was before. Did you get your soul back?
Yeah, I hope so. But when you, over almost 2 years, almost every day, work so close to a man with all this, have done these terrible things and have these terrible ideas, you have to be extremely professional all the time. You can't show everything what you have inside. Of course, you have to be professional, and you have to block your feelings. I have to put my feelings at home. It's terrible that so many people get killed, and it's one of the most important issues to solve. That how shall we deal with this extremist? How can we make sure it won't happen again? It will probably happen again, I'm sorry to say, but how can we make the risk as low as possible? And I think that it's important that not young people are recruited into this right-wing extremist milieu. And to prevent that, I think that's important that they get the right information. And of course, I also see that Muslims and Christians and all people in New Zealand are holding hands, and the rest of the public and the rest of the people in New Zealand are not afraid of each other.
That's Geir Lipstad talking to our producer Bridget Burke. The context, of course, for that is that he represented the jailed terrorist from Norway when in 2011 he shot dead 77 people. There'll be lots of strong views on that, and as I said, the context is that the accused gunman, in this case in Christchurch, wants to represent himself. The media are discussing at the moment about how such a trial might be covered. We're going to go to some other news now. The son of a security guard killed by a single punch says his death has left a hole in his heart that will never go away. Goran Milosavljevic was punched at a Papakura supermarket last May as he tried to stop 17-year-old Sydney Jaden Kokiri. He died in hospital the following day. Now aged 18, Kokiri pleaded guilty to manslaughter in December and appeared in the High Court in Auckland for sentencing this morning. Our reporter Tom Furley went along.
Goran Milosavljevic's sons described how their dad was one of a kind, and being a father was the best job he did. In a statement read by a lawyer, the youngest recalled how a neighbour had taken him to the hospital after school.
I don't usually pray to God for solutions to the problems in my life because I know I need to work for the solutions. But that day I did. I prayed for my dad to live.
However, in the early hours the following day, his father died.
It was the biggest hit for me in my life. I was absolutely shattered after losing my dad. I felt the combination of anger and sadness, and I'm afraid that these feelings are never going to disappear.
Goran Milosavljevic was popular with staff and customers alike at Countdown Papakura. On the day of his attack, he had tried to stop then 17-year-old Sydney Jaden Kokiri stealing a charity donation box and a packet of razors. Kokiri swung and missed before Milosavljevic hit him and pushed him up against the store's front window. Justice Jargos outlined what happened next.
As you walked away, Goran and the crowd followed you. You turned back to Goran and punched him in the side of his head with your closed fist. Goran fell to the ground, where he hit his head on the concrete pavement. Your mother encouraged you to leave the scene, and you ran down the road.
Mr. Milosavljevic had moved to New Zealand from Serbia, leaving his sons there to live with their grandparents. But in another tragedy for the boys, their grandparents died in a car crash in 2017, and they moved to New Zealand. As Justice Jargos told the now 18-year-old Kokiri, the boys have now been left broken, far from their family, and have had their new life in New Zealand turned into a horrible nightmare.
Mr. Kokiri, I do not need to emphasise the enormous pain you have caused these already traumatised young men finding their place in New Zealand. I take that impact into account in determining your sentence.
Kokiri's lawyer, Ish Jayanandan, told the court her client had been using methamphetamine and had been exposed to violence from as early as 5 years old.
By his own admission, he has witnessed nothing but violence throughout his upbringing. Matters that other children will not be exposed to, he was exposed to, be it drugs, be it violence, be it gang involvement. To some extent, violence has been normalised.
She says her client is incredibly remorseful and is working to change and learn how to deal with situations. Justice Jargos sentenced Kokiri to 2 years imprisonment, but said he could apply for that to be substituted for home detention if an appropriate address could be found. For Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
It's just coming up to 6 o'clock. After 6 o'clock news, we will go back to Lisa and our Checkpoint team. Logan Church is there as well. They're in Christchurch around Hagley Park. Burials have begun, of course, for the first victims of the mosque massacres. The father and son, Khaled and Hamza Mustafa, they both died on Friday, and they were the first of the 50 Christchurch terror victims to be laid to rest at a funeral service in the city's east today. Khaled was 44 and Hamza, his eldest child, was just 16 years old. Police confirmed today they've identified 30 victims of the terror attack. In the last few days, we have been crossing live to Lisa and to our other reporters on the ground there in Christchurch. I do encourage you, if you want to, go back and watch them because their video reports, they're all on our website, rnz.co.nz/checkpoint. You can see them and watch them back. Some touching memorials, lots of flowers are left there at the wall as well as the cordon near the mosque. 29 people are injured and still in hospital after the attacks. 8 remain in critical condition in the intensive care unit, including a 4-year-old girl in Auckland's Starship Hospital. She was the one who suffered gunshot wounds to her pelvis. Meanwhile, something positive, the Give a Little pages set up after the attack have raised just over $7 million. Victim support has started distributing the money. The Police Commissioner Mike Bush as well making comments today. People who were worked up perhaps and concerned about the delays in reuniting the bodies of the victims with their families. He says that 6 coroners, including the chief coroner, are on the site, and his point is that if they do get this wrong, it could make the criminal trial very, very difficult in terms of what's presented as evidence. So there is some serious justification for the delays. He does say that while I think that 21 victims have been identified, but many more will be in the next day or so. But he does say that some will take longer, and we just need to be patient there. 28 people, we repeat, are still in hospital after those terror attacks, and 8 of them are in critical condition in the intensive care unit. Some of those doctors talking about their experiences today. More after 6.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui ko Susana Leatawa tēnei. The Prime Minister says the country's gun laws are a blueprint of what not to do. At a press conference this afternoon, Jacinda Ardern reiterated her desire to change the gun laws in the wake of Friday's tragedy. Ms Ardern says the country's gun laws have a number of loopholes, and many New Zealanders would be astounded to know how easy it is to access military-style semi-automatic weapons.
My hope is that going forward we will demonstrate what you can do if your starting point is similar to ours. We do have a road to travel though, and I'll be announcing further details very, very soon.
Jacinda Ardern has announced there will be a 2-minute silence this Friday, a week after the terrorist attacks, and she says planning is underway for a memorial service in Christchurch to mark the tragedy. The Turkish ambassador to New Zealand has been called in to explain inflammatory comments made by the Turkish president in the wake of the Christchurch mosque attacks. The comments have sparked a diplomatic row. Australia is reviewing its travel advice for Turkey just a month out from Gallipoli commemorations. Elizabeth Brown reports.
Speaking at a campaign rally, Recep Tayyip Erdogan criticised the Anzacs for their role in Gallipoli and threatened to send New Zealanders and Australians who came to his country with anti-Islam sentiment back in a casket. Today, the Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison summoned the Turkish ambassador to demand the comments be withdrawn. New Zealand's Foreign Minister Winston Peters is on his way to Turkey and says he plans to raise the matter and put the record straight. New Zealand's travel advice to Turkey hasn't changed, but travellers are being told international reactions to the mosque shootings are difficult to predict and may change at short notice. Ko Elizabeth Brown, aho.
The first funerals for victims of the mosque shootings have been held. Mourners gathered at the Memorial Park Cemetery in Linwood this afternoon to farewell 44-year-old Khalid Mustafa and his son, 15-year-old Hamza Mustafa. The bodies were wrapped in cloth, according to Islamic tradition, and carried high in the air by mourners firstly to a marquee where prayers were said before being taken to the gravesite nearby. Other burials are also taking place today. Meanwhile, the bodies of 35 of the 50 victims have now been approved for release to their families. The police are working to allow the Muslim community back into the Al Noor Mosque on Deans Avenue for Friday prayers. The Linwood Avenue Mosque is also expected to reopen later this week. A police spokesperson says evidence from the crime scene has been collected as quickly as possible and a company was brought in to clean the buildings. The police will maintain a presence at both mosques for the public's assurance and safety. RNZ can now reveal more details of the employment dispute that led to the resignation of Stephen Barclay as the head of the KiwiBuild unit. They're in an Employment Relations Authority determination in a case taken by Mr Barclay, who argued being on suspension was destroying his reputation and career. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The decision was released late last year, but media were unable to report it. RNZ, along with TVNZ and Stuff, requested the non-publication order be lifted after Stephen Barclay made extensive comments in the media about the dispute. The decision says the ministry received 4 sworn affidavits from senior managers about undermining of staff, problems with stakeholder engagement and termination of a contractor relationship. Mr Barclay denies the substance of the complaints and was arguing he should be reinstated. But the Employment Relations Authority accepted the ministry's position that having him return to work would pose inherent risks for staff. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
An aid group estimates 400,000 people have been made homeless in central Mozambique after Cyclone Idai caused widespread devastation. Reports say floodwaters are so deep in some areas that trees and telephone poles are completely submerged. The death toll has risen to more than 200. Neighbouring Malawi and Zimbabwe have all been affected. The BBC's Shingai Nyoka is in Chimanimani in eastern Zimbabwe.
The weak, the old, women with children on their backs trekked for hours, often through knee-high mud to get to safety. The makeshift centre has only the basics, food, shelter, and they've been running out of medicine. We heard harrowing stories of homes with people still in them swept away into nearby Mozambique, never to be seen again.
Shingai Nyoka reporting. It's coming up to 5 minutes past 6. The dropping of Japanese side the Sunwolves from Super Rugby has come as a surprise to a coach of the rival team. The Australian newspaper is reporting the competition's only Asian side is set to be dropped from the competition from the end of 2020. Super Rugby organisers SANZAR are refusing to comment, saying only that they will issue a statement on Friday afternoon. The Sunwolves have narrowly lost their last 2 matches to the Blues and Reds, but before that upset the Chiefs in Hamilton. Blues assistant coach Tom Coventry says the Japanese side has shown plenty of progress already this season.
Been put together quickly, they've been really competitive, they've got better and better, they've been able to recruit well, and there've been no flash in the pan either. They've been good this year, so that surprises me. But then again, Super Rugby is in a changing landscape, as is World Rugby at the moment.
Tom Coventry. The former New Zealand cricket captain Stephen Fleming is stepping down as coach of the Melbourne Stars Big Bash 2020 team. Fleming is not seeking an extension to his contract despite leading his team to this season's final. He steered the Stars to 2 finals in his 4 years there and will continue to be involved with the Stars as their international talent advisor. Fleming remains at the helm of the Chennai Super Kings, who he guided to last year's IPL title. The WBC heavyweight boxing champion Deontay Wilder will put his title on the line against fellow American Dominic Breazeale in May. Breazeale has had just 1 loss in his career, and that was to WBA, IBF, WBO and IBO champion Anthony Joshua in 2016. That's the news.
The man had the long jacket and had the camera and the big gun, and he just shooting all the people.
There's a guy who's jumping on the gunman who was trying to overpower him but failed to overpower him. Eventually, shot him.
There was a river of blood coming out of the mosque, and that's a scene that you don't forget.
They have been treated like criminals and terrorists, all while their communities have felt the building violence of racism and Islamophobia.
If they couldn't control what was going out on their platforms, they should have just turned off all uploads.
Morning Report, weekdays 6 till 9. Then on 9 to noon, will a shortage of volunteer sports coaches mean fewer teams on the courts and fields this winter? Then after 10, the movie about the life of a Pacific woman, produced by a group of female Pacifica filmmakers. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. For Northland, mainly fine today with a few showers tomorrow. Auckland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Central High Country. Fine apart from areas of cloud with isolated showers in the afternoons and evenings. For Gisborne through to Wairarapa, cloudy periods and the odd shower. Whanganui through to Wellington, fine weather. Marlborough, Nelson, Buller, Westland and the Canterbury High Country. Areas of morning and evening cloud, otherwise fine apart from isolated afternoon and evening showers about the ranges. For the Canterbury Plains, Otago, Southland and Fiordland, areas of low cloud or fog morning and evening, otherwise mainly fine. At the Chatham Islands, violence, cloudy periods and the odd light shower. It's 8 minutes past 6. You're with RNZ National.
Thanks very much, Susanna. Tēnā koutou. Welcome back to Checkpoint. I'm Alex Perrottet. If you've just joined us, an emotional Muslim surgeon has today choked back tears as he talked about operating on a 4-year-old victim of Friday's terrorist attacks. The little girl suffered multiple gunshot wounds to her pelvis. She still remains in a critical condition in Auckland's Starship Hospital. The Prime Minister spent the day in Christchurch, where she visited Kashmir High School, which is mourning the loss of several members of its community. She also announced there will be 2-minute silence on Friday in memory of the 50 lives that were violently taken. And Victim Support has begun distributing some of the $7 million it's received to its Give a Little fund. But first, we're going to go back to Lisa Owen and our reporter Logan Church, who are standing by in Christchurch, where the first of many burials got underway this morning. Lisa and Logan.
Thanks, Alex. If you're just joining us, we are outside the Botanic Gardens in Christchurch, and as you mentioned, the first of the burials took place today, and Logan, our Christchurch reporter, was there. Logan, these are really unusual times, and the funeral this morning started off in an unusual way too. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. Well, the funeral started off in what can only be described as a health and safety announcement, where funeral goers were told by the announcer what to do if the police came and told them all to evacuate. And I've never been in a funeral where that's been the case, and that I think speaks to the incredible security concerns that the police still have here in Christchurch. I mean, even around the funeral, the fence line was surrounded by armed policemen, so the police are certainly not taking any chances.
And this burial this morning was a father and son. What can you tell us about them?
Well, Khalid Mustafa was 44 years old, his son Hamza only 16. But what was quite remarkable was actually seeing Khalid's other son, Zahid, who we understand to be only 13 years old. He was being pushed in a wheelchair. Obviously, he's still recovering from wounds. And we heard quite a remarkable thing, which we're told he said over his father and brother's grave, which is, "I don't want to be here alone," speaking, essentially referring to the fact that he does not want to be there standing over his brother and father. He'd far rather be there with them. Certainly at a really uncomfortable time for him there at that funeral today.
Very confronting stuff. And graciously, a number of the mourners spoke to you after the service. What's their key message?
It was quite incredible speaking to some of the funeral goers who were at that funeral. Their main message to the rest of New Zealand is to stand together, to stand up against racism, to stand up against people who would put their community down. And they said the best thing that people can do is to stand side by side with their Muslim community when they need it and show them that they are not alone.
Thanks, Logan. And we heard today that a Muslim surgeon gave a tearful account of his efforts to save a 4-year-old victim of the mosque shootings. 29 people are still in Christchurch Hospital. 8 of them are in critical condition. The 4-year-old girl that Dr. Eri Kanafa operated on is now in a stable condition, and she is in Auckland Hospital along with her badly injured father. Dr. Kanafa, a Muslim who knows 2 of the people who died in the attacks, he spoke to the media this afternoon, and our Christchurch reporter Conan Young was there and he filed this report.
It was very sad to see a young girl on a table with vascular injury. Excuse me. So I've come in and I called my colleague, Tim Pasford, to join me because this is a 4-year-old girl and we need help. So I've scrubbed in and this lady had a major vascular injury, which I managed to repair. It is definitely the highlight of my career as a vascular surgeon. I can tell you I've been cross-banding with Auckland and the surgeons, and she's critical, but I think I'm optimistic and I think she's going to come out of it.
Eri Kanafa is a vascular surgeon, just one of the specialists in charge of trying to treat the victims at Christchurch Hospital. He said he managed to keep his emotions in check as he carried out what was a very complex operation to fix serious damage to the young girl's arteries. But the toll of the last few days was clear for all to see.
I have 4 kids, and the youngest is 7, the oldest is 14, and I've just imagined that this is one of my kids. I've coped. I was able to perform my job, and I left my emotion after. After I prepared her, my colleagues were around me as well. Excuse me, guys. Another thing I want to say that thank you. All my I've come from England. I'm a Lebanese origin. I'm a Muslim. And I'm an Arab. And all my colleagues, Kiwis, have not stopped texting me or emailing me and send me flowers. And that was really great and made me proud working in this great town. And I tell you guys, I've trained in England, in Birmingham, one of the biggest hospitals. And what we've done in Christchurch would never, ever, no one could repeat what we've done. We've done extremely, extremely well.
For Dr. Kanafa, this was a very personal tragedy.
One of my own patients, vascular department, he passed away. And the other doctor, Amjad, also I knew, he passed away. Of course, Salma, my wife, knows, as a woman in circles, she knows most of the wives have lost their husbands. So we knew some of them, we visited some of them. As a doctor, usually you tend to perform well because we perform under stress, so we're pretty good. Emotionally, you leave that when you really go home.
The hospital has received plaudits from medical professionals around the world for the way its staff have handled the sheer number of patients that came through its doors, 48 within the space of just a few minutes, most with extremely serious bullet wounds. The DHB's chief executive, David Mates, says he's extremely proud of his staff who have been involved in surgeries lasting for hours at a time, with multiple operations in some cases on the same patients. Now, he says, is the time for them to be given a well-deserved break as their patients begin what is expected to be, for some, a very long road to recovery. Kei o te tahi ahau, mō te hotaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Konanyang tēnei.
Throughout this process, there have been bright spots along the way. Despite everything that happened, there are little bright spots that you come across every day. Let me show you a couple of them. So down here at the Botanic Gardens, someone has attached all these flags together and they've got different messages, different words in different languages. Nonga, Māori for peace. Amor, of course, French for love. Further along, German, also love. And Simon can just creep in a little bit behind us and you can see this bundle of olive branches that have been tied together and left here with a message that says, we share these olive branches in the spirit of peace and love. So all along here, little bright spots, despite everything that has happened, people sharing their love and thoughts. Now, hundreds of people have also registered to give blood since the Christchurch mosque shootings, saying that they want to do what they can to help, and this is what they can do. So the New Zealand Blood Service says the number of appointments to donate blood has doubled, and that it is incredible to see New Zealanders rallying together. And Jesse Chang has this report.
Yeah, that feels fine, thank you.
Deep red liquid flows from Carl Rowan's arm through a clear plastic tube and slowly fills up a bag. Donating blood can make some people queasy, and for the first-time donor, he's no exception. But the Aucklander says the devastating attacks last Friday changed everything.
I've definitely meant to, or intended to donate blood for a while, but I'm a bit of a wuss when it comes to needles, so I think it was definitely a motivating factor to make an appointment and show up.
Carl Rowan is just one of more than 500 people around the country who have signed up to give blood since the attacks on Friday. Aska Burge from the Blood Service says they'll follow up with everyone who registers in the coming weeks. She says it's been amazing to see the way New Zealanders have come together.
Oh, it was incredible. We had, as you know, a lot of people do in times of events like this. Blood donation is something that people think of, which is wonderful.
Ms Burge says the blood supply for Christchurch is currently full, and she's asking people to register first instead of just showing up to donate. She says blood has a short shelf life. It only lasts 35 days, and the organisation needs to stagger donations. Aska Burge says, like everyone else, she was in complete shock when she heard news of the shootings.
I actually had just left Christchurch. I was actually visiting the donor centre, which is not far actually from one of the locations, and I arrived back in Auckland. And that's the point, you know, we already had an emergency response team in place.
Abene Verma was also at home in Auckland when the notifications about the attacks started streaming in.
I started the television, and then the whole time I was just watching the news, what's happening and why. So yeah, it was horrible. Yeah, I was just calling my couple of friends in Christchurch, asking what's happening, and if they are all right.
Abhinay Verma says all he could think about was the families and how they were feeling. He's also a first-time donor in New Zealand and says he wanted to help.
I thought I'll just go and do something, just not sitting at home. So I asked my wife, she said, okay, again, go and you can just donate the blood. Good. It's a good feeling, it's doing something.
A feeling that's being shared by hundreds of others around the country who are pledging to help save lives, one blood donation at a time. Mō te hōtaka o te ahi nei, ko Jesse Chang tēnei.
Today I met Shane Tanu. Now he was outside the Linwood Mosque. He's a former gang member who is now part of a group called Peacemakers, and the name really says it all. He is a Christian and he's come down every day to both mosque sites, every day for the last 3 days, to pray for the victims. But he says the accused gunman, though, will get absolutely nothing from him.
I actually choose to show love, because if I let him make me feel hateful or spiteful and reacting how I feel towards him, he gets the power. So I'm choosing to show love because I don't want to let him have that power over me. So it's all about the love. Hate's just ugly and it's poison.
You've come down every day for the last 3 days, you were saying. What's made you want to do that?
I went down to Dean's Ave and the gardens and just meeting the people and the Muslims and just going up and giving them a hungi and showing the love and just saying, this is your place, I'm sorry. Words can't say enough, but my actions do. That's all I can do.
And you keep coming back to do it?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. It's because I want to show the love, that they are loved and that they are valued, and there's no need to have fear, because we as New Zealand have their backs. You know, if that happened in my church, what would I do? I know I would have put my life on the line for my brothers and sisters, and all brothers and sisters in the whole nation through this, because we're choosing to love and receive them, and that's powerful. When you show real love to people, that fear and that anxiety they feel, and you hug them, and it's just a hug does something amazing, and it just makes them feel like, oh, they care, people care.
It's hoped that the mosque will open again soon this week so that people can return and worship. Some people might be afraid. You were talking to me about that. You don't want them to have fear, do you?
No. You know, there's people here that'll stick up for them. You know, we won't tolerate it.
So I was talking to Shane Tanu outside the Linwood Mosque there, and there was some thought that it may open today or very soon, and the police are working really hard to make that happen. We were there for several hours today, and there's a lot going on there. There was cleaning crews there from about 11:30 in the morning. There's still police forensic team. You can see them walking around in their overalls and with their shoes covered, going in and out of the mosque property. There's also a builder on site, so they're trying to restore this mosque to the way it was before. A lot of people, the car park was apparently full on the Friday during afternoon prayers, and all the cars were up the driveway. Today, a tow truck moved those vehicles to a shopping centre next door. They were the worshippers' cars, and they've been moved off that site gradually one by one. And this afternoon we saw some people coming to start to pick those vehicles up. So I know that police are working very hard and do hope to have that mosque open again shortly. Now, some Muslim families haven't left their homes since the Christchurch terrorist attacks, and in response, students in Canterbury and Dunedin have been banding together to offer them support and providing them with food hampers. Our Otago Southland reporter Tess Brunton reports.
Hamza Obadat says there's easily over 100 families in Otago who don't feel safe to leave their homes. The University of Otago Muslim University Students Association president is part of a multi-agency group trying to offer their support through food.
This week we are starting to plan shopping lists that we can go and buy
We have a lot of volunteers willing to help, and also organisations such as ORED, Red Cross and Musa obviously as well. So they will start buying things this week, and then by the time we have a good list of homes that we can visit, we'll start.
He says Muslim women have been particularly affected because they are more visible with the hijab.
For them, it's definitely a terrifying thought that Dunedin was an original target, and some of them haven't left their homes since Friday. Thank God we've had a lot of volunteers and help, and we've sent a lot to go talk to them personally.
Association members are visiting all of the student halls in Dunedin to offer their support. Hamza Obadat says he's sure every Muslim living in a foreign country would have experienced discrimination at some point in their lives.
This happening is sort of reliving those moments. The fear is just being verbally abused, not accepted, feeling ashamed to be who you are.
Up the coast, the Christchurch Student Volunteer Army is doing what they can to help, including offering rides to people who feel uncomfortable using public transport. A member of the group, Isabella Fanslow, says there's been an overwhelming influx of offers to help from the student community.
It's difficult because, we usually respond to natural disasters where there's a clear need for help, where we can go and dig some silt, or we can, after the Port Hills fires, we're replanting trees. Whereas this is, something unlike anyone in New Zealand has experienced before.
She says the volunteer group expects more requests for help later in the week when the families of victims start arriving from overseas. Isabella Fanslow says the drivers are respectful and they don't need to know why people are using their service.
It'll be the sense that's over all of Christchurch that we're sensitive to their pain, and we know that they are feeling pretty sad and pretty scared, as I think a lot of people are. They are very grateful as well for being able to have rides to where they need to go. But we're not really prying, just being a friendly face.
Back in Dunedin, volunteers at a community-led development group are trying to offer their support where they can. The Valley Project Manager, Tess Trotter, says it's not just about having conversations, but also taking positive action.
There's one family that are feeling a bit afraid at the moment, so we're going and walking their children to school every day and walking them back home and just checking in, and we've got the local police officer just having a check on their street just to help them feel secure.
Hamza Obadat says creating a sense of community is about having trust in each other.
Be aware that the person next to you, your neighbour, your classmate, is another human going through their own situations. So be there for each other. When you're walking down the road, smile at someone. If they don't smile back, it doesn't matter. Maybe they reacted a second too late. They will smile and cause someone else to smile.
The university will host a vigil for peace and a hijab day tomorrow. In Dunedin for Checkpoint, Cortes Brunton Tane.
We want to show you, just before we go, the number of flowers, the volumes of bouquets and things that are turning up every day. I just did a quick, stepped it out. It's about 5 metres deep, so you can get some perspective. From the Botanic Garden wall out, it's about 5 minutes deep with flowers in some parts. Simon's just going to walk with me and let's show you all the flowers laid out here that people have brought down and they continue to bring down every day. Candles tucked away as well, soft toys that people have left, messages of really hope and condolence, and it stretches all the way down and keeps going. And Simon is just going to show you how far down it stretches. And into the evening, sun has gone down, it's getting a bit chilly here, and people are still coming. They read the messages, they just stand here, they might drop off some flowers, just looking at what people have left to stand with these communities that have had this terrible thing happen to them and to Christchurch and to the whole country. Now, thousands of people are expected to visit mosques this Friday when the Muslim communities around the country open their doors for the public to gather in solidarity and remembrance. And they're opening their doors to everyone. Amy Williams with this report.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. In the name of Allah, the most merciful and most beneficent. May peace be upon you all.
A greeting of peace from the Muslim Association President, Clark Kashkari. He says he's been overwhelmed by thousands of messages in support of the Muslim community from here and overseas. 4 Auckland mosques will be open on Friday night for the public to visit, along with community leaders of different faiths and political persuasions. Mosques in Ponsonby, Ranui, Pakuranga and the North Shore Islamic Centre will welcome the community from 5 to 8 o'clock. Mr Kashkari says the Muslim community wants to promote solidarity.
It's brought us all together and made us realise that we are one big community. People likes of this person that committed these atrocities, they failed in their objective. And rather than them trying to divide us as a nation, as a community, I think we have brought it together.
Another mosque in New Lynn will open its doors for an hour-long vigil from 6:30 on Friday night. Further south in Waikato, Hamilton's mosque will also open its doors to the public from 2 o'clock on Friday. Waikato Muslim Association President Dr Asad Mohsin says the mosque doors are open to everyone, including the mongrel mob, who asked if they could stand guard outside the mosque on Friday.
They don't need to stand outside the mosque. They can come inside the mosque, because as far as we are concerned, we are not scared. If we have to face anything, we will, as a committee, stand up and face it. And we don't want to give that reflection to anyone that we are scared. We will continue.
He says the community's thankful for the outpouring of support as people have been coming together to grieve.
Muslim community in Hamilton did not know that they had such a large extended family. The outpour of grief, the love and affection which has been shown by the wider community of Hamilton to the Muslims living in Hamilton, it is commendable.
Auckland woman Raywin Rash and a friend have started a social media campaign for people to show their support of the Muslim community by wearing scarves on Friday. She says some people were worried about the appropriateness of wearing a headscarf, but she had sought approval from a Muslim women's organisation before launching the campaign.
Our hope was that as many people could take part as possible, so that if a Muslim woman walked out into a street or into a crowd or into a shopping centre or anywhere, that she wouldn't feel alone.
Ko Amy Williams, Tēnei.
And now we have RNZ News headlines. I'm Brian Crump. It's 6:30. The Prime Minister says many New Zealanders would be astounded to know how easy it is to access military-style semi-automatic weapons. The Turkish ambassador to New Zealand has been called in to explain inflammatory comments made by the Turkish president related to the mosque shootings. The first funerals were held today for Friday's victims of the Christchurch tragedy. And police are working to allow the Muslim community back into the Al Nur Mosque on Deans Avenue for Friday prayers. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Country life gives time for people to reflect.
Rather than have big dreams, you sort of have smaller, closer targets which are